I bring to you now the former senator from North Carolina, the former Democratic candidate for vice president in 2004 and candidate in 2008, Senator John Edwards.
Thank you very much, Reverend Sharpton. And Martin III, it's wonderful to be with you again. We were last together at Riverside Church, and it's wonderful to be here with this great organization and with all of you who support it in this march forward for equality and justice and fairness and an America that all of us believe in. Reverend Sharpton heard me more times than he wants to think about talk about the two Americas that existed in 2004 in the presidential race. Those two Americas are more prominent today than they were in 2004. And all of us have enormous work to do for us to move America forward in the way that all of us here believe in. And this organization and Reverend Sharpton and I are united in this cause to do what needs to be done to move us forward. I want to say, Al, Elizabeth sends her love to you. And to Martin III, who we were together with at the Riverside Church. And thank you so much to all of you. I'll tell Elizabeth that you clapped when her name was brought forth tonight. It's hard to understand, but I bet many of you have been in a similar place. When I watched this tragedy that Reverend Sharpton spoke about unfold at Virginia Tech, I couldn't help but think about the parents of the children who senselessly died there and what they were going through, what they felt. And not just what they felt yesterday and today, but what Elizabeth and I know from personal experience they will feel tomorrow and the next day and the following day. And they need us. They need all of us. They need to know that we are with them, that we support them, that we will be there for them forever, that America is not a place where every single human being is on their own, that we believe in a community. We believe that it says something about the character of America, what we do for those among us who are struggling and suffering and who are bereaved. And that's part of what this mission is about. That's part of what this great organization is about. Because, you know, you've been, as Reverend Sharpton knows very well, there's been a great deal of debate over the last few weeks about a broadcast personality who spoke words that went way past the line by anybody's measure. It was amazing to me, I have to say to you, it's on a personal level, that there was even any debate, that there was anything to talk about whether these words that were uttered crossed the line. Now, here's the truth. They didn't cross the line, they defined the line that still exists in the United States of America. How much bigotry is too much? Any bigotry is too much. How much inequality is too much? Any inequality is too much. How much prejudice is too much? Any prejudice is too much. And the fact that this has begun a national dialogue, a national conversation about an issue that too many times our leaders love to put their face against the wall and pretend is not there, but for the voices of Martin and Martin III and Reverend Sharpton. Thank goodness now this discussion is front and center. It's right there in front of all of us. And I want us to talk not just about the inequality and the prejudice that exists in America today, not just to have a conversation about it, but as Reverend Sharpton spoke about, what is the content of what we intend to do? It's all fine and well to talk about it. It's great to recognize a huge issue facing America and the divide that exists in America. But what are we going to have the backbone and courage to do? What are we going to do? What are you going to do? We have 37 million people, by the government's estimation, many million more, who wake up every single day in America worried literally about survival, worried about feeding and clothing their children. This is not okay. It says something about the character and content of our soul. What we do about millions of our own people who wake up every day literally worried about feeding and clothing their children in the richest nation on the planet. People say to me now, they say, I don't understand what you're doing. You're out on the presidential trail. Yeah, you ran a poverty center since the last election, and I know you're proud about that. But the people don't care about this. The voters don't care about this. I care about it. America needs to care about it. We need to stand up for those who have no voice. We need to stand up for those who are struggling to survive and who want to know, the people in America who want to know what we can do about it. I got a lot of ideas about what we can do about it. How about if we actually have a living wage in the United States of America so that people who are working hard to support their family can actually support their family? How about if we expand the Earned Income Tax Credit, the refundable tax credit for low-income families? How about if we make it easier, not harder, for workers to join a union in America so that they have a voice, so that they can collectively bargain? I got a really simple test for this, by the way. If somebody can join the Republican Party by signing their name to a card, any worker in America ought to be able to join a union by doing exactly the same thing. That's democracy. That's what we believe in. What about these predators that prey on the poorest families in America? These predatory lenders and payday lenders, they are there hovering among our most and above our most vulnerable families in this country. What are we going to do about it? Here's an idea. How about if we as a nation make a commitment to set up bank accounts for low-income families? And how about if we teach financial literacy? How about if we as a nation match what they're able to save so that once they can actually have some assets, so that they have something to fall back on? And how about we have a national law, not a state law, not a local law, but a national law in the United States of America regulating these predators so that they can't prey on our most vulnerable families? There is so much to be done. You know, we watched those pictures coming out of the 9th Ward of New Orleans when the hurricane hit. I'd ask every single person in this room, does anybody think we're the only ones that saw those pictures? I'm here to tell you the whole world saw them. I saw this publication from overseas. It came out right after the hurricane hit. Had pictures of victims from the 9th Ward and this huge headline in bold print. And the headline said, "The Shaming of America." Here's what the world wants to know. What is the richest nation on the planet going to do about millions of its own people, millions of our family who are worried about survival? The pictures they saw streaming out of the 9th Ward of New Orleans. You know, everybody loves to denounce our federal housing programs, the bureaucracy, it doesn't work. Listen, here's what we ought to do in America. Instead of concentrating poor people together, which is what we've seen over and over and over, how about if we have a million new housing vouchers in America, and instead of using them to concentrate poor people together, how about if we use them to allow working families, low-income working families, to migrate across some of these economic and racial barriers that exist in America today? Listen, shouldn't just be rich people and white people can decide where they want to live. Everybody in America ought to have mobility. Everybody ought to be able to move. This is what we believe in. And for all those young men in America who live in the inner city, who are hungry for hope, hungry for a chance, as everyone in this organization knows, and as unfortunately I've heard too many times over the last few years, so many young African-American men are absolutely convinced they're either going to prison or they're going to jail, right? They got no hope. They got no chance. We got to change that. And we can change it. How about if America does something it hadn't done in 70 years? How about if we create 1 million new jobs, stepping stone jobs, For those who are having difficulty getting employment, they can be out there doing the public good. They can work in parks. They can work in community action centers. They get used to going to work every day. They get something on their job application, on their resume. There's so much that we can do. What about all the young people in America that want to go to college? We've had billions of dollars taken out of the federal budget for young people to be able to go to college. This is insanity. We ought to make it easier for young people to go to college. Here's an idea. Stay with me on this. Call it College for Everyone. And we've actually put it in place in a poor section of eastern North Carolina. This is what we said to every kid in that area. You graduate from high school, qualified to go to college, and commit you'll work at least 10 hours a week, we'll pay for your tuition and books. Very simple. Knock down these barriers so that young people get a chance and an opportunity to go to college. Don't tell me there's nothing we can do about poverty in America. There's a lot we can do about poverty in America. We need leaders, and we need a national will to do it. What about 47 million people in this country who have no health care coverage? We have a dysfunctional health care system in America. And I want to say to all of you, you're going to have a lot of other good people who are running for President of the United States who are going to come before you in the next few days. Listen to them. Listen to what they have to say, but listen to the content of what they have to say. It is not enough to say that we need access to health care. I've had too much. I've been listening to this for years now. We need access to health care. We need affordable health care. No, we don't. We need universal health care in the United States of America for every man, woman, and child. And every candidate, so far I'm the only one, but every candidate ought to have a universal health care plan. It's not enough. It's not enough to have high rhetoric about hope and aspiration. You got to have a plan to get us there. You got to take the hard steps. You have to make the hard decisions about how we're going to do it. Let me tell you what I think we ought to do. I think we ought to make health care available to every single man, woman, and child. We ought to make it mandatory for every man, woman, and child in America. And we ought to say to employers, you got to cover your employees, or you got to pay into a fund so that we can provide health care coverage. No more pre-existing conditions. Mental health care should be treated exactly the same way as physical health care. We ought to make it mobile. People ought to be able to take their health care with them from one job to the other. We ought to make sure we fill in the cracks in this health care system. Preventative care, chronic care, long-term care, all ought to be covered. We ought to subsidize health care for all low-income families and provide subsidies for middle-income families. We know what needs to be done. We know what needs to be done to provide universal health care in the United States of America, but we got to have the guts to do it. And by the way, anybody that comes here in the next few days and says to you, listen, this is what we're going to do in America. We're going to have universal health care. We're going to end poverty in America. We're going to strengthen the middle class. We're going to change the way we use energy in America. And in the process, we're going to eliminate the federal deficit. They might have a bridge here in New York they want to sell you too. I'm here to tell you it costs money to have universal health care. My plan costs $90 to $120 billion a year, and I'll tell you exactly how I pay for it. By rolling back George Bush's tax cuts for the richest people in America. That's how I pay for it. But we know what needs to be done, ending poverty in America, a real plan for universal health care. And I just have to say in passing, the other thing is we have to do it for ourselves, and we have to do it for the world. America has got to end its addiction to oil. We cannot continue on this path that we're on today, and we have to take seriously this challenge of global warming. I think George Bush is the last person in America that believes it's not happening. America needs to lead. We need to show. And by the way, you want to know who are the greatest victims? The greatest victims of the potential for global warming, the greatest victims of environmental degradation, the greatest victims of environmental tragedies in America? We know who they are. The poorest, the most vulnerable, people of color. America has to lead on these issues. I'll tell you exactly what I think we ought to do about global warming. We ought to have a cap on a national cap on carbon dioxide emissions in the United States of America. We ought to ratchet that cap down. We ought to auction off the right to emit any carbon dioxide under that cap. We ought to use that money to transform the way we use energy in America. We ought to invest in clean, renewable, alternative sources of energy, wind, solar, biofuels. We ought to put $1 billion into developing new technologies. I'm talking about clean coal technology, carbon sequestration. $1 billion ought to go to Detroit. The most fuel-efficient vehicles in the world should not be built somewhere else. They ought to be built right here in the United States of America by union workers working for our car companies. We know what needs to be done. We do. Whether it's health care, energy, ending poverty in America, all of which are huge moral issues facing our country. I'll tell you one of the things that needs to be done. We got to fix the election system in the United States of America. And I don't, you know, these touch tone screens, all that stuff. How about if we have a little patience and we actually have paper ballots in America so that we know that everybody who goes to the poll to vote is going to get to vote. And we don't have any doubt about whether their vote's going to be counted. We can make the technology available to the disabled and those who need access to that technology. But we need to know that when you go to the polls and vote for the President of the United States, that your vote counted and your vote will be counted in the election. We shouldn't have any question about that. We shouldn't have what happened in Florida and what all of us have been so worried about Ohio in the 2004 election. We shouldn't be concerned about those things. So we have huge challenges in America. And by the way, those challenges, which everyone in this room knows, the health care and economic disparity that exists in America, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. If you are a person of color, if you are African American in this country today, you are much more likely to be poor, much more likely to have heart disease, much more likely to have cancer. What are we going to do about it as a nation? When are we going to actually lead again? And everybody knows, everyone in this room knows about this issue about what America's confronted with in Iraq. Iraq is a bleeding sore for America. By any possible measure, it's a bleeding sore. I spoke at Riverside Church a few months ago about an extraordinary speech that was given by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King 40 years ago, where he spoke up loudly and clearly for the first time against the war in Vietnam. And he had a refrain in that speech that he went back to over and over. And what he said was, when faced with these enormous questions of national importance and world importance, silence is a betrayal, and standing silent is a betrayal. Brothers and sisters, we're at that place again. We are. This war in Iraq, for all of us or any of us, to stand quietly and let this president continue to escalate this war is a betrayal. And America and Americans have to speak out. And I want to say something because you're going to have members of Congress coming here to speak to you. And I hope they'll speak to this issue. Because here's what I believe. Elections have consequences. There's a reason. There is a reason that the Democrats are in control of the United States Senate. There is a reason that the Democrats are in control of the United States House. Because the American people have spoken. The American people have said loudly and clearly they want a different path in Iraq. They don't want to continue on this path now. The Congress is sending the President a bill that contains a timetable for withdrawing our troops in Iraq. George Bush has said repeatedly, that he intends to veto this bill. Listen, if the President of the United States vetoes a spending bill to provide the support, the funding for our troops, it's the President of the United States who's decided not to support the troops who are serving in Iraq. It is not the Congress. And we need the Congress and our leaders in Congress to stand up with strength and courage and not be silent. If he vetoes this bill, if the President vetoes this bill, what they ought to do is they ought to send him another bill with a timetable for withdrawal. If he vetoes that, they ought to send him another bill with a timetable for withdrawal. If he vetoes that, they should send him another one. Over and over and over. This is not about politics. This is about war. This is about life and death. And as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, standing silent on an issue of this moment is a betrayal, and we must speak up, all of us. I want to say, finally, just on a personal level, to all of you. You know, I went through this personal experience a few weeks ago where Elizabeth and I were in a hospital room for many hours one day, and we got some bad news at the end of the day. The doctors left, and the two of us were left in the room alone. And I said what you would expect me to say to a woman I've been married to 30 years and who's the finest human being I've ever known. I said to her, whatever you need, I will be with you, I will stay with you. If you need this campaign to be over, it will be over. Whatever you need from me, you will get. And she was quiet for a little bit, and she said, here's what I need. I need for us to continue on this march and on this cause that is our lives. And she has said repeatedly that what we've gotten far too much credit for this, by the way. And I'm very appreciative of the kindness of all of you and so many others. But you think about it, and Elizabeth says this better than me, but you think about it, there are millions of women who are confronted with exactly the same thing, with exactly the same diagnosis. And they don't have television cameras watching, and they're not in the newspapers. And what do? They get up and go to work the next day. They go out and take care of their family. They're cooking food for their children. And they do it the next day, and the next day, and the next day. We have huge issues facing this country. We do. And it is a betrayal for any of us to stand quietly and not speak out with passion and strength and courage. We are way past the time for caution and polls. Now's the time for strength. Now's the time for leadership. We don't need a politician in the White House. We don't. I'm not looking for a great politician to be president of the United States. What America needs and what the world needs is a leader. We need somebody with backbone and courage. And then finally, we need somebody who believes in you. Because the strength in America is on the ground. The strength in America is the possibility, the great possibility of a grassroots movement to change this country. We've seen it before. We've seen it before. And great changes have resulted. We need it again. Elizabeth and I have decided what we're going to do. My question to you, and the question I'd ask you to ask yourselves, is what are you going to do? What are you going to do? How much are you willing to do? How much do you love this country? Because if you believe in a moral and just America, in real equality, in real justice, which is what this march is about and this movement's about, and you actually want to see America leading in a moral and just world, not just by leaving Iraq, but making primary school education available to 100 million children in the world who don't have it, by not standing silently by while hundreds of thousands are slaughtered in a genocide in Darfur and Western Sudan, by not standing quietly by while thousands of children are born every single day in Africa with AIDS, and the richest nation on the planet stands silently by and watches this happen. We're better than this. The United States of America is better than this. And your voice needs to be heard. And it needs to be heard loudly with strength and passion and courage. You can't, as Gandhi said, you need to be the change that you believe in. I'm going to tell you, Elizabeth and I, Every single day, for as long as we are living and breathing, we're going to be the change that we believe in. And I'm here to ask you to join us in that cause. You be the change you believe in. What are you willing to do? God bless you all. It's a great privilege for me to be with you tonight. It's a great honor to be with you. And thank you for being here, supporting this extraordinary organization. Thank you all very much.
Hit it out the park.